Elevar. Thank you, Faye. And if you are not familiar with Elevar, basically our job is to manage all of the tagging and tracking for your Shopify store and all of the essentially online consumer behavior that happens from that ad click or that affiliate link, all the way to their final purchase conversion. And we certainly like to feel that we do this better than anyone in the industry. We do this primarily through very, very comprehensive server-side tracking. And we also have client-side tracking for certain areas that do not support, that aren't supported by server-side. And if you want to learn anything more about Elevar, we'll give you a way to do that in the chat. I am joined today by John Cairo, who is our lead solutions engineer, and he works very closely with our partner ecosystem. And one of our key partners is SourceMedium, and really the guy that's going to give us the bulk of the information today is Fei Wang, and he is the founder and CEO of SourceMedium. I'm going to let them both sort of, do a hello and introduce themselves. The way that we will run this is it's going to be very conversational with John, maybe a little of myself and Fei, and sharing basically how you can use multi-touch attribution for the success of your online store, or if you're an agency for the success of your client. We want you to also participate, but what we're going to do to keep things flowing is have you put your questions in the chat. So if you don't want to forget your question, you can put it in the chat at any time. And what we'll do is at the end, we're just going to open it up to an open discussion Q&A. So please hang on. And then we've got some special offers at the very end for everyone as well. So without further ado, I am going to ask you, Faye and John, to just unmute and go ahead and introduce yourselves.
Go ahead,
John,
Faye.
you want to? Okay. Thank you. So thank you, the partners at Elevar, for giving us this opportunity to share a little bit of what we know, and also, the learnings that we've accumulated over time, working very deeply with our customers and scaling with them. And I think one of the most fun things so far, ever since we developed the Elevar integration, was to continuously explore the opportunity that is actually within the data set that Elevar produces. So I'm very excited to actually get into that a little bit. Just a one-liner on SourceMedium, and then I won't say anything more. We help ambitious omni-channel brands or digital only with advanced data infrastructure, so they can have high-quality metric system reporting, but also some of the more advanced use cases like attribution. So, everything that's here today have been, experimented and co-developed and co-designed with some of our mutual customers. So very excited to be able to share my knowledge, and hopefully folks can learn something new.
Awesome, Faye. I'm John Cairo. I'm the solutions engineer at Elevar, and this is really exciting for us because a lot of the data we produce never really gets processed. And a lot of times our clients and partners ask us what's next after we provide them with data. And that is exactly where a company like SourceMedium comes into the mix. So this is exciting because they take our data and make it a lot more valuable. It's kind of like secondary processing. So we're going to talk about all that and maybe some misconceptions about Elevar and where a company like SourceMedium comes in. So super excited to add some clarity and information for you guys.
Thank you, John. Shall we get started? All right. So a quick agenda, we're going to just start with what is attribution, period. The goal really is to help everybody understand, for technical and non-technical users, so hopefully If you don't have any prior knowledge about it, you just hear about this a lot, in everyday conversations. This will help you demystify that a little bit. And then we're going to dive into two of the most popular methodologies, multi-touch attribution, or MTA, and media mix modeling, or MMM. And most of what we're going to unpack is going to be around MTA. But if there's interest to dig into other methodologies, perhaps we can have future sessions around that. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the first party data that every brand already produces, but may not be necessarily owning, and what the actual kind of like impact of that could be in the context of attribution. And hopefully then we'll have some time to answer questions. And then of course, John, feel free, Darren, feel free to interrupt me anytime. I'd like for this to be a conversation. So what is attribution? It's just a concept or a methodology or a set of methodologies that helps marketers understand the effectiveness of their marketing efforts, and their customer journeys. And really, it's about understanding where to prioritize your marketing efforts, whether that is about optimizing a specific channel or allocating or reallocating budget. And it has to be a holistic way of looking at it so that, the last touch channels don't always end up with all the credit, right? Because ultimately marketing is a holistic effort overall. And with the goal of essentially, right, maximizing your return on your advertising spend overall.
Before you move forward here, Faye, I want to talk a little bit about Elevar in the context of attribution. So a lot of our clients will say, do you guys do attribution? And the easy answer to that is we don't do attribution at all, but we have the raw materials that are needed to do attribution. So Darren came up with a great analogy yesterday about sports, and about how a channel may broadcast a sports game, which would be akin to what Elevar does with what's going on your site. But we don't start commenting and saying, well, this guy, Leon, I'm going to use hockey because I'm Canadian. We're not going to say Leon Draisaitl passed to Connor McDavid, but so McDavid scored a lot of goals, but really it was Draisaitl who made all the passes. So we should really be crediting Draisaitl with a lot. We won't ever do that kind of stuff, but we will broadcast the game and allow a company like SourceMedium to start making those comments and decisions. But we are sort of attribution agnostic. But again, we have the raw materials.
Yeah, that's a really great analogy. And just for some interesting data points, we looked at the Elevar data set that we have on behalf of some of our customers. Some of you guys are here right now. What we were able to see is that out of all of the purchasing events that we were able to identify, over 80% of them, and sometimes over 90 for some customers, have user ID level identification that can allow us to tie back into prior activities. So, ultimately, my understanding of Elevar's way of doing identity resolution is it's more descriptive, right? It's not probabilistic, and that can give you more certainty. But even in that case, we're seeing a lot of touch points that leads to the eventual conversion. So there's going to be a lot of opportunities in terms of the kind of value that you can unlock with the data set here.
Yeah, exactly. We hold the information together better than you can do out of the box with your traditional, say, Shopify integration. We will collect and store information about click IDs, UTMs, that would probably get lost as a user goes through their purchase journey if that journey takes any more than a couple days. So I'll stop there, but there's a bunch of stuff that we're doing to make this data work really well.
So, attribution technology has advanced, but also a lot of it is still the same from like decades ago, right? So, but what's actually kind of driving the advancement in attribution technology, right? It's really this increasingly complex purchasing journey from mostly single touch to multi-touch and now multi-channel, right? But also there is just a lot more first-party data. And just real quick, first-party data just means the data that you produce just by operating. So that's the data that you own, right? So as a brand, there is more and more first-party data being available. The platforms are making it easier and easier to actually get the data out. So that also then gives the brand a lot of potential and possibility in terms of, start owning some of this attribution in-house. And then, of course, there's this focus on privacy, whether that is regulations or iOS 14 or ad blocks. And last but not least is, right, all of the advancements in AI and machine learning that has been happening that now also makes this actually easier, but also it can be more customizable for the brand without an army of data scientists. So a quick comparison on the methodology itself, so the best way that I understand it, and of course, I'm not claiming to be an expert. This is just my best effort at understanding this and also presenting this to everyone. MTA is a lot more tactical. It's a lot more ground up, while MMM is a lot more strategic and a lot more top down. So on the MTA side, right, we rely on actually very granular user level, event level data. So that necessarily also means that it's mostly going to be data from digital channels, right? Because that's where you can actually kind of collect some of this data. The focus can be more on the short to medium term, and we'll get into some of that as we kind of get into the use cases. But what's cool about that is it actually allows for near real-time optimization, whether that is your marketing campaign or your on-site journey. And of course, it does face tracking and privacy challenges. So, the goal here isn't to have the ability to track every single user and every single touch point that they have with you, but ultimately you're still going to be able to capture a good percentage of those users and a good percentage of their touch points, and you can actually extrapolate from there. Use cases are actually a lot more than just allocating budget, right? So, that obviously it does help you with the budget allocation question, but it's actually really good for things like conversion rate optimization, personalization, things like assigning page value. So there's a lot of different use cases once you have this data set. On the media mix modeling front, again, it's very top down, right? So it's really good for medium to long-term strategic planning. It does incorporate data points from online and offline channels, right? So that could be obviously a in-person activation event or billboards or TV or even celebrity activation that you can't really track with a pixel, right? It does also, not every model does it, but some model takes into external factors into consideration, things like, the macroeconomic conditions, and even weather, and then it's really kind of then use case wise revolves around high level budget allocation, but also scenario analysis and planning. So you can have a good way of understanding, where can you actually scale and where does that saturation point reach in terms of ROI as you scale a channel.
So Faye, can you just quickly go back to that? So these aren't opposing technologies. These are really complementary, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the way that I would think about it is, it's never going to hurt to have multiple attribution methodologies, because there is no silver bullet when it comes to attribution. And I think within those methodologies where you're now dealing with models, so it also will not hurt to have multiple models, right? Whether that is an off-the-shelf model, which there are many in our industry, or something that is internally developed, or open source models, right? So as an example, both Facebook or Meta and Google have open source MMM models that you can actually leverage and deploy internally.
Got it. The one thing I wanted to mention before we move on is if you're used to universal analytics and attribution and universal analytics, you know, back in the day when we had that, you'd have these live screens where you could see what was happening with your advertising, like up to the, well, I don't know if it was millisecond, but very recently, like during the day. That changed with GA4. You can't do that anymore. There's a 24 to 48 to sometimes 72-hour delay, which means that when you're doing something like when you're launching a campaign and you want to know how it performs right away, you can't really see that, which I know many of the people we work with are super disappointed about. What we're talking about with MTA and using Elevar's data and then eventually getting it to SourceMedium, the information is live. So you get that real-time stuff back, which is really important. And that's part of Elevar's pub sub integration, which is like a raw data stream. And this is what SourceMedium consumes from us and builds on. So just important to note that with what we're talking about today, we're talking about bringing back real-time reporting to you.
Yeah. And I think one thing to re-emphasize is that that data is not sampled, you know, so that is all of the user streams, all of the server-side streams that is happening via Elevar directly made available to you without sampling. Sampling just means, you know, GA takes a percentage of the data and extrapolates on probably what's going on, right? And of course, there's inherent risk within that. And the other thing I wanted to add that I love about the Elevar data stream is that that is a data stream you actually do care about, right? If that data stream isn't good, then your downstream destinations will have performance issues. So that then gives the brands the incentive to really make sure that the implementation is and the instrumentation is perfect. And then, of course, the downstream impact of that is the data that you get from that is also of a higher quality as a result.
Great point.
So let's start with some use cases, right? Where is the ROI at, right? So on the MTA side, again, there's a lot more than the bullets that you see here, but both of them will, both methodologies, as you can see in the first bullet, will help you measure the effectiveness of awareness channels and brand campaigns, you know, in different ways, but they can give you data points that, again, is going to be complementary for you to triangulate what's really working. On the MTA side, you know, because the data is so granular, right? It's at the user level, it's at the event level, you can really do very complicated user journey analysis, right? So I have a screenshot of the Sankey chart below. That's actually something that we're going to be launching relatively soon in the next few weeks for some of our customers, which I'm very excited about. But also, you know, you can now have these custom touch point value assignments, right? So if you think about the landing page optimization use case, if I have 2 or 3 landing pages in the middle of the purchasing journey, that was actually instrumental for me to make that decision, right? Those landing pages deserve credit, right? And of course, that scales out to all kinds of things like UTM params and channels and things like that as well. And ultimately, that's going to help you with conversion rate optimization, because only when you understand your user journey can you and what channels they're coming from, right? Can you truly understand how to optimize those landing pages, which can ultimately lead to personalization efforts. And because also we have the ad ID in a lot of these events, you can also now tie that user journey to a specific creative or ad, which then further goes into that whole personalization effort overall. On the MMM side, you know, it's really kind of about understanding your media mix budget decisions, right? Are you spending too much on Meta or you're not spending enough, right? Should you start spending other channels, right? You started spending and testing a specific channel. You want to have confidence around scaling that. Right. So the example that I have below is, you know, essentially the relationship between spend and projected revenue. Right. So a lot of these MMM providers, but also open source models will give you what the likely saturation point is with a target ROAS, right? So then that can give you a sense for, okay, we can ramp this up another 1.5x, and then the rest of that marketing budget can go to some new initiatives or other channels. And then lastly, it's about scenario analysis and planning, right? Projecting out different scenarios, different budget mixes, and understanding how that may impact your return on ad spend and your revenue growth overall.
Hey, Faye, I have a question.
Mhm.
So I see that for MMM, you have the geographic incrementality, easy for me to say, and
Yeah.
not for MTA. So I guess my question is, why is the geographic relevance not called out in MTA? Because wouldn't that also provide me with some important information that may feed the MMM model, right?
Absolutely.
So, yeah.
Yeah, that's a great question. Yeah, so I think one thing that I forgot to mention is that the MMM model improves as you feed it better data, deeper data, and fuller data, So, obviously, okay, you have these touch points and their geographic location, IP address, and all kinds of stuff, but well, there has to be a model on top of that that helps you to understand what's going on, right? So the incrementality one is a more advanced tactic that typically larger brands employ because, you can run awareness campaigns, you can even run direct response to campaigns in a specific geographic area that exhibit a specific customer behavior, right? So in that case, the rest of the country, in this case, wouldn't know or be exposed to those messages, right? So that's where you can then start running different types of experiments, provided that the geographic region exhibits similar behaviors. And that's going to also allow you to have more confidence to scale out to the rest of the country, rest of the world, whatever the case may be.
Perfect, thank you.
Yeah. So let's unpack. So we're going to just kind of like really focus on unpacking MTA, because I think this is what I hear a lot as people kind of come in and wanting to have more advanced use cases with their data. So I have a very simple example here. This is one purchase that happened over 3 days. It started with a view item. So these event names are standardized to the GA4 e-commerce event names, just FYI. So view item is the same as view PDP, right? This hypothetical company sells t-shirts, right? So as you can see, I've highlighted the join key that we can use to resolve this entire journey, which in this case is a user ID that Elevar actually assigns, right? So if Elevar can resolve an identity across sessions, it's going to give it that same user ID. So as long as you have that, you can stitch your journeys together. And that's why other data sources will actually be complementary, like GA4, because GA4 also has a user ID. But what's interesting here is if you look at the journey, right, with the view item in July 1st, the UTM is telling us that, right, a meta prospecting campaign drove that click, right, with an ad ID of the, shirt at number 7, right? And then they landed on a white t-shirts landing page PDP. And then they probably close the session from there. A little bit later in the day, they come back with a retargeting ad from Meta, right? And now they're landing on a mid-funnel landing page, which is something that we did a lot in my mattress days. Back when I used to sell mattresses, the landing page of 10 reasons, right? So we have 10 reasons why our shirt's the best, or whatever the case may be, right? And you have an ad that is driving that, right? 10 reasons ad, or whatever that may be. But then, not convinced yet, but maybe a lead cap happened. So you can imagine another point here for lead cap. We just ran out of space. But then, right, they leave again. So let's say later that night, they get the Klaviyo abandoned browse pre-purchase campaign, right? Because of that lead cap event. So now they add to cart. But what's interesting here is perhaps in that abandoned browse, you have some product recommendations. And one of them is a black t-shirt, like I'm wearing right now, right? So they actually end up landing on the black t-shirts, right? But now this event have a revenue impact, right? Because now we have the line item information and how much is in the cart. But then they go to sleep and then they forgot about you altogether, right? So then July 3rd comes along and your abandoned cart email triggers, and that brings them back to begin checkout. But what's interesting here is, their landing page now is officially the checkout page, right? So that's where you're going to lose the value of the initial PDP view, the 10 reasons page, and the black t-shirt page, but also the value that Meta actually drove, right? Of course, Meta will take credit because of the attribution window and things of that nature, and of Elevar's tracking, right? So, but ultimately, it doesn't really give you the type of data that you need to be able to say, yeah, 10 reasons landing page actually has a monetary value to us of X, but in this case, you can't. And then lastly, the purchase finally happens. And as you can see, we have now our settled IDs, right? So settled ID just means you can now point that to an actual customer and an actual order, right? But the user ID stay consistent as 1, 2, 3 throughout the whole journey. And but we can also now add additional data sources like zero-party attribution from our partners at Fairing and No Commerce. And maybe they actually say, I actually originally heard about you from Tim Ferriss. Okay, so without that piece, then you would have assumed that the awareness came from Meta, but it's actually from an influencer. I hope that's clear. Is this clear for everybody? Okay, awesome. So what did we learn from all that? Let's just do a quick check-in for this particular order with the order ID of 789, right? It took a total of 5 sessions for the conversion to happen. It took 3 days, right? It has a revenue impact of $100. And then we actually have multiple conversion channels, starting with Tim Ferriss on the awareness front, followed by the Meta prospecting and retargeting ads, followed by the final conversion driven by Klaviyo, your email efforts. There was actually 4 landing pages involved, right? The 2 PDPs, a 10 reasons page, and the final checkout. There was 2 ad creatives involved here, right? The shirt ad and the 10 reasons ad, 2 Klaviyo flows involved. And then there's, of course, other inputs like referral domains, promo code used, et cetera, et cetera. But we can spend all day basically digging up all the metadata there. But what's cool is that now that you've linked it to an actual customer, you have all of the customer level data, right? So are they a first or a repeat purchaser, right? If they're a repeat purchaser, is this their first, second, third, fifth order? What is their LTV, right? What are their previous order attributions? So now you really truly have like this holistic picture of how this customer actually got to know you. So I'll just do a quick crash course on what are all the different MTA models that is like popular, right? You might find this on a textbook, right? But of course, with the advancement in machine learning, you can now have much more nuanced credit assignment logic. Of course, you don't need machine learning to necessarily do that. It can be developed internally. So starting with linear, right? Really, this is saying every single touch point gets the same credit, right? So what that means is out of that $100 of this revenue impact, we had 5 sessions. So each session gets $25 or $20, right? If we're just kind of doing really, really simple math here. Time decayed is really about having an emphasis on the more recent events, right? So of course, last click is just like the only thing that happened right before the purchase. but this is still putting more emphasis on the recency of the events and giving those events more credit because they are closer to the purchase. U-shaped is interesting because it essentially gives the most credit to the first touch and the last touch. So, that's giving credit to however the awareness may have happened, and then also the thing that's closest to the conversion, and then evenly spread out the rest of what's left. And W-shaped is essentially, so the last two is a little bit more nuanced, so W-shaped is about giving credit to the first touch and then giving credit to the lead capture moment, which, is going to be somewhere in the middle of the funnel, or it could be in the beginning. And then again, giving the most credit towards the end of the purchase funnel. A full path is probably not really necessary, I don't think, for most brands, but this is giving the most credit to the first touch, the lead cap, and some kind of a activating or key purchasing pre-purchase event, like adding to cart, right? And then the last thing being the actual purchase. Of course.
Sorry, I just want to reiterate back to what we were talking about earlier. Where is Elevar an attribution tool? Do we do attribution? This is the stuff that we don't do. We just don't make these kinds of decisions. And this is the kind of stuff that a company like FaZe at SourceMedium may. There's another aspect to this though. With a channel like Meta, you've probably, everyone seems to be on one side or the other in terms of, do they take too much credit for what they're doing or too little credit? I think from our perspective, I think we're on the opposite side of the merchants, and we oftentimes think that a channel like Meta or Google Ads should actually receive more credit than they do, and they should take credit for absolutely everything that they do, because they're not necessarily an attribution tool either. They're just trying to tell you when they were involved, and you want to know that. So where this is all leading is Meta has a tool called channel lift studies, and those channel lift studies allow Meta to kind of get in the mix on attribution a little bit. So you can send them information about how conversions happen. Let's say you have a Google Ads conversion. Somebody buys, last click was Google Ads. You send them the information along with who you think made that conversion happen, in this case, Google Ads, and Meta will say, we were involved in a click like a day ago, and we think we deserve some credit here. And they'll take credit in the platform. These channel lift studies are a fairly new feature of Meta. I think they've been around for a year or so. They're relatively hard to implement. Elevar makes it push button. So if you're looking for a new perspective and you have a Meta rep that you can talk to, you can get that new perspective with like no work. You enable it in the app. You talk to your Meta rep and tell them it's on, and they will provide you kind of sort of similar data to what FaZe showing you here from their perspective. They'll take credit for what they think they deserve. So I think it's the easiest way forward with this stuff is usually what gets done. And the Meta channel lift study is, if you're interested in like dipping a toe in the pool, it's an easy way to sort of start exploring this stuff.
Yeah, thank you for that. I think that's really exciting. And I think geo incrementality testing is also an option. So, we helped one of our customers also overnight a few months ago, getting that data set ready with DMA level information. And, you can imagine a situation where they're testing a new campaign type or way of doing your ads, but just for Texas. Right. So then your whole business doesn't tank, right, if the thing doesn't work. So, there's a lot of different ways of, again, understanding attribution, and, is incrementality part of an MMM methodology, or is it its own thing, right? Like, ultimately, it could be all kinds of different things. It's just about, first of all, having all of your first party data ready and at the highest quality possible. But then second of all, drive that from the use cases, which
before you move on from this, I just have a couple of questions, and you might be getting to the answer. But so one, I just want to confirm, these percentages that you have for all these different models, those are industry standard percentages. So if you choose that model, that's the way it's going to be applied, right? Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And then,
Yeah.
do you see, so do you see that merchants typically go with one of these over any other for a particular reason? And do you
Mhm.
have, and John too, answer, do you have one that you think is the most relevant and would give them sort of the most realistic picture of who should get credit for what?
That's a great question. I'm happy to go first. So yeah, I think most of what we see right now is, folks are using more of an off-the-shelf tool, where it's not really clear, and there may be documentations, but it's sitting with a vendor. So that's, I think, if you're using one of these tools, it's important to understand how they're doing credit assignments and all kinds of stuff like that. And, because it may or may not be the right fit for you. And the other thing is, it's really specific to the business type, So one of our share customers, Elix Health, elixhealing.com, they have a more intensive sort of pre-purchase journey of, evaluation and personalization and things of that nature. So in that case, right, you have to have certain things happen before you can really even buy the thing. So so what are the touch points in that pre-purchase quiz or evaluation? Another one of our shared customers, CPAP, has something similar, right, when it comes to a prescription, right? So without those things, a conversion cannot happen. So, in that case, hey, maybe the full path makes a little bit more sense, right? Or maybe the W shape makes a little bit more sense. But if the purchasing journey is relatively straightforward, and it's just a great product, another one of our share customers that's here, perfectjean.nyc, right? People want jeans, they need shirts. Like, it doesn't take a whole lot of evaluation if it's a good value and a good product. So in that case, I think a more simple model would probably suffice.
I'm going to cheat here and say data-driven attribution. And that's the only reason I cheat here is just because it's something that you can explore if you have a GA4 property set up. Google it. I won't go through all the details here, but Google it if you're interested. It's a little bit different than what we're talking about here, where you let an algorithm decide where the weights should be placed. So something you can explore pretty easily if you're interested.
And there's a question from a participant that I think is fitting here. So if you don't mind, I'll just ask it here.
Of course.
And it's how much customization is possible in terms of either crediting or penalizing one of the different sources. So they have a source, for example, that they would like not give any credit to. Are you able to do that in these?
Yeah. Like, for example, what we do is we actually just unify and get the data right up to the point where you can start doing the customizing. And I have a good graphic in a couple different slides that will kind of allow you to visualize that. But I think the key is, that is a reason why, as a brand is scaling, to start owning this in-house, because only the brand would understand those nuances that an off-the-shelf provider may not be able to provide. And ultimately, one size fits all is tricky when it comes to modeling, just in general, any kind of modeling. So, and the data-driven attribution piece with GA is also a great point. Like, that is an example of using machine learning to essentially figure out, hey, this is how I want to spread out the credits. And it could just be any percent, right? I can give 1% to one touch point and 98 to another because the machine said so, right? So that's where you're going to give up some control as a result of that. But it's important to experiment. Like, what I would do really is to create a reusable like data template where you can have all of these different models and compare, right? And that's where the human actually comes in to sort of evaluate the outputs relative to what they know to be true. And the human ultimately have to be the one that decides on how to do the credit assignment. But it's not one and done, because your business is always evolving. All of a sudden you're in Costco. All of a sudden you are, in Canada, right? So all of those things is good reasons to also just be always rerunning these models and always be recomparing and reevaluating what you should be making your decisions with. So what are the building blocks of attribution, right? And this is generally, I would say this is generally applicable to like MMM as well, but some of it is more specific to MTA on the technical side. So there is two aspects, right? One is organizational or cultural, right? So this is human beings have to sit in a room, right? Computers can't help you with that, right? And really the most important thing is start with the underlying business objective of why you need to do attribution and what North Star KPIs should be the one that you're looking at in terms of optimizing towards, right? Because if the initiative is successful and your objective is to grow top line with a media efficiency ratio of 3, right? Like that should continue to be the case, and the model should be giving you all the information you need to make that happen. But it could be profitability, right? It could be other things as well, or repeat purchasing, right? And then the other thing is to just really map out your customer journey and to be continuously updating that as you add different sales channels, right? So you obviously have your website, but you might have a mobile app that you build with something like TapCard or other technologies, or other sort of ways of essentially generating sales, right? That includes Facebook Shop, right, and Instagram Shop. Understanding the privacy and compliance that has to happen there, right? Because obviously, if you're collecting PII, then there is a privacy implication and how that data needs to be stored. And then aligning on a measurement framework, what are the events you actually are tracking that is in your funnel, right? That goes beyond PDP view, add to cart, begin checkout, and purchase. And what can you actually do with that if you did start tracking those events? And then standardizing your insight generation practices, reporting template, and ultimately, actually, what is the plan around activation of all of that once you have the outputs? What are you actually going to do with that? On the technical side, the most important thing really is about aggregating your first party data, right? And for some data sources, you can't go back in history. And I think Elevar is a good example of that. We can start collecting the data the moment we start collecting the data, and look back is difficult for some data sources. So it's always going to be worth it to start your data aggregation journey as early as possible. So you have all of the data points for when you need to make certain decisions later on. And then, of course, you actually have to instrument these tracking, instrument Elevar, instrument GA4, instrument all of that on your website and on your app, right? All kinds of stuff. Standardizing the data formats and the taxonomy, which I'll have a slide on in a little bit. Unifying your naming conventions like UTMs, promo codes, landing pages, and then ultimately, just like the example that I showed, connecting your user journeys with the anonymous ID, which was the user ID from the previous example, with persistent IDs, right? Persistent IDs being your order ID and customer ID that Shopify generates or any other platform, and then getting to the actual modeling bit, at the very end. The reason that I kind of wanted to show this slide is because I think most of us probably have experienced this, right? A customer comes or a prospect comes and says, I need to do attribution, right? But it's like, okay, why though, right? What do you actually want to do? And do you kind of have some of these foundational building blocks? Because if you have incomplete data, or low quality data, and you model on top of that, it's going to give you bad outputs, and you're going to be making bad decisions, which ends up being worse than actually just doing nothing at all, right?
Big, I just wanted to give you a heads up that we have like 10 minutes left, and I know you have some great customer examples to show, so I wanted to make sure that you're able to share those.
Yeah. So I'm actually at the end, just because of the timing constraint. So after this slide, we can move into Q&A. So this is a diagram of essentially all of the event streams that a brand likely already has access to today. So from the website, you have your GA4 event stream, you have your Elevar event stream, right? Obviously, combining the two can make it even more powerful, right? Whatever Elevar may have missed, GA4 may have picked up, and vice versa, right? From your mobile app, also you have GA4, but also Tapcar, we are able to ingest their event stream as well. But what's also interesting here that I added more recently is physical retail, right? I know Buxton has a lot of physical retail data there, but also some of our partners like Novel and Bridge, right? Whether that's using an Apple Wallet pass or a QR code, allows for that sort of like offline redemption, offline self-identification. So we can also resolve that to a customer record. And then ultimately also the zero party piece with our partners at Fairing and No Commerce. So now you have all of these different data streams that's basically going to be fire hosing 24/7, right? Well, you need a way to essentially centralize that. So that's where a data warehousing technology comes into play. So whether you want to adopt something like BigQuery or Databricks or AWS or whatever, Snowflake, right? Or you can use a vendor like SourceMedium to just like simplify that and really kind of just get to the part where you need to just work on the modeling, right? And then what's key here really is about producing a unified event schema that unifies all of these different event streams into one event stream, right? So identifiers, right? Your session ID, user ID, customer ID, but also in the physical retail case, what is the store ID? Or even what is the clerk ID that actually run up the order? Hey, do you have some questions to ask about that today? Maybe not, but might you have a question about that a month from now? Maybe yes, right? So that's why you want the data. And then the next piece being the attribution, right? The UTMs, landing page, referral domains, the ad ID, etc. And then standardized events, right? So the events should all be any PDP view events from any of these sources should just say view item, right? They shouldn't have different names because every vendor does have a different naming convention. So unifying that's very important. And also event source, like did that come from your mobile app, from your website, from physical retail, the revenue impact, and of course the timestamp, which is going to allow you to have that timeline view of how a purchase happens, and ultimately PII, right? Name, email, phone, etc. And then in that data warehousing environment or in that data infrastructure environment is where you can then go ahead and do the modeling piece at the end. So that's kind of what I meant by like what we do is we bring the data to 90% of what you need to do, the boring stuff essentially, but that's also very scaled and it's very hard to do for a brand. So then you can essentially focus on the part where it's just about deciding on the model, right? And how you actually want to model that data. That is it. So would love to take some questions. And also I'm going to have our offer here as well. Okay, so, oops, Darren, you're on mute.
Oh, Darren. For anyone that wants to scan these QR codes if you're still on the line, you get to take advantage of this. 50% off our expert install, which basically is the end-to-end implementation of everything for Elevar for client and server-side tracking. And it's with the purchase of our Essentials plan or above. and for SourceMedium, a free data audit. So go ahead, scan those QR codes. We'll just leave this up while we take your questions. Here's a question, Faye. What would you say is the hardest part about adapting a solution like this for a brand?
Yeah, so the hardest part is probably just building the left side of all of this, right? So you got to think about, every vendor has a different way of pushing data to you. Obviously, then you need to adopt an actual data warehouse, right? Without accidentally spending $10,000 a month, which has happened to us, more than once. And just like the data modeling of it, right? So that's just tons of SQL. Should I be using DBT, or should I be doing something else, right? So like that is the part that is expensive and risky to do. But then of course the model selection process as well, and I think understanding which ones of these models most closely correlates with the mechanics of your business, right? But that necessitates understanding the mechanics of your business, right? Things like seasonality, things like, right, campaign blast, what that actually does, right? Or promo codes, or your LTV motion, right? Because only when that happens, especially when LTV comes into the question, it becomes really tricky because, well, do we start assigning credits based on LTV, right? Some might say that's a good idea, but that sounds kind of hard, right? So that's like where some of these things can become tricky on the other end of it.
We put the last slide up again because also, first of all, I want people to have the offer, but also there was a question about SourceMedium pricing, and I think we'll who should people contact, Faye, if they want to get a hold of you guys?
Yeah, so you can email me directly at faye@sourcemedium.com. That's F as in Frank, EI at sourcemedium.com. Our pricing is pretty straightforward. We look at your trailing 12 months top line, across essentially e-commerce channels that we support. So we currently support Shopify, Amazon, ChargeBee, and Stripe. So like everything else from there, like if you add additional data sources into our hosted BigQuery or whatever, that's all going to be included.
And I'm going to ask one more question. There's nothing else from the floor, but so when you were saying about, you want to standardize on naming conventions and things, which makes total sense, right? And anytime you're building any kind of database, that's what you want to do. You want to be forward thinking ahead for how might I use this? How should I name this, right?
Mm-hmm.
And John, add in some color here because I may be confusing things, but I know that a lot of times brands will have their own custom naming convention for a variety of things. So how does one balance, right, having a bunch of custom names versus being able to apply something like multi-touch attribution properly when you're going to need, for obvious reasons, not just have those events named, but probably also promotions and other things that are going to be very important in that model?
Yeah, so this is like something around the realms of like marketing ops or ad ops, right? So a lot of brands come in into our universe with naming conventions that was messy, right? Where maybe the first 10 million was kind of all over the place. All of that can happen, but in a data warehouse environment, that's why it's important to have access to the underlying data. You can fix that. But then from there, what's important is to have planning, right? Relative to the channels and relative to the campaigns, right? Unifying your UTM values, unifying your promo code values, making sure, the CS team is creating, $0 reshipment promo codes and things like that in a consistent manner so that you can actually then understand what those values are, right? And then ultimately connect that to the channel, right? So you know, the Google CPC is probably the one that is like the most default, and no one really customizes it that much. But once you get into affiliates or influencers and all kinds of stuff, right? If you have a good UTM coverage on that, and the influencers are using it, and they have a dedicated landing page, which, you know, one of our shared customer Element does, you know, quite a bit, then you can actually, maybe even if you didn't get the I heard about you from Tim Ferriss, you can still get to Tim Ferriss in that attribution journey, right? So that's kind of where the naming convention can really come in, but it's never too late to start unifying your naming conventions. We have a UTM template, for example, that you know, I'd be happy to share as well.
Great. Well, I think that's everything. Super interesting. I want to thank everybody that attended for taking time out of always busy days. We appreciate it. And please reach out to us with any questions. You can reach me at Darren, DARREN, at getelevar.com. John is at Jonathan at getelevar.com, and Faye is Faye at SourceMedium.com. Thank you, everybody. Appreciate it, Faye.
Thank you,
John,
guys.
thanks much.
Thanks, guys. Bye-bye.
All righty. Bye-bye.